He built an empire with no room for love, convinced he'd never have an heir. She was a down-on-her-luck assistant with nothing left to lose. One night in a Milan hotel shattered their carefully drawn lines. And 3 weeks later, she was pregnant. But he was infertile. At least, that's what he believed. As secrets unravel and hearts collide, they must confront a truth neither expected. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The email came at 2:43 p.m. on a Tuesday, just as Annie Wade was spooning instant noodles from a chipped ceramic bowl, sitting cross-legged on the second-hand futon in her one-bedroom apartment. Her inbox pinged, and she glanced at it, more out of habit than hope. She nearly dropped the bowl. Subject: Interview invitation, Blackwell Enterprises. She blinked once, then twice. Her heart began to pound, and her hand trembled as she clicked it open. The words blurred for a second as adrenaline surged through her veins. Dear Ms. Wade, we would like to invite you for an in-person interview with Mr. Damien Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Enterprises. Her lips parted in a soundless gasp. Mr. Blackwell himself? That couldn't be right. This had to be a mistake, or spam, or some cruel algorithmic prank. But the signature was official, the company logo embossed beneath it. She reread the message 5 times before believing it. Then she screamed. Not a loud, girlish shriek, just a short, strangled exhale of disbelief. She leapt to her feet, noodles forgotten, and grabbed her phone. Mom, she whispered breathlessly when the call connected. I think I just got an interview with him. Damien Blackwell. Blackwell Enterprises. Her mother hesitated, then whispered with awe. Oh, Annie. She didn't sleep the night before the interview. Her nerves were a restless tide. She pressed her only tailored suit, the navy blue one she'd worn to her last job, and practiced her answers in the mirror a dozen times. Her smile, her posture, her handshake. She even looked up Damien Blackwell's entire biography. Orphaned young, started his company in his 20s, Forbes 40 under 40, a known perfectionist and rumored to be colder than marble. The man was a fortress, respected, feared, unattached. Annie wasn't naive. She knew she was lucky to even land the interview. She had no elite connections, no glittering references. She'd lost her last job not for anything she did wrong, but because her boss's niece needed a spot. It had broken her in quiet ways. The way a small tree bends under snow, not enough to snap, but enough to scar. She stepped off the elevator on the top floor of Blackwell Tower and was greeted by silence. It was modern, minimalist, and intimidating. Even the walls looked expensive. The receptionist barely looked up before directing her down a glass-walled corridor. Then she was standing in front of the office. His office. The dark double doors opened slowly, as though cued by fate. Damien Blackwell stood at the far end of the room, facing the window, silhouetted against the skyline. When he turned around, Annie's breath caught. He was taller than he looked in photos. Sharply dressed in a charcoal suit that molded to him like second skin. His face was all angles, chiseled jaw, piercing eyes, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. But those eyes, they pinned her. Not with judgment, but something deeper. Curiosity. Stillness. Ms. Wade, he said, his voice smooth but unreadable. Come in. She did. She walked with her back straight, chin high, despite the sweat prickling her palms. He gestured to a chair. I've already read your resume. I don't need you to repeat it. Tell me something that isn't written on paper. She paused, caught off guard. Then, quietly but firmly, she said, I don't quit, even when it would be easier to. His gaze sharpened. A beat passed. Then he asked, Why do you want this job? I need it, she said honestly. Not just the money. I need to prove to myself that I wasn't wrong to believe I'm capable of more. A long silence followed. He didn't blink, just studied her. Finally, he stood and extended a hand. You're hired. She stared. I am. He nodded once. You start Monday. My assistant will send you the onboarding documents." And just like that, the meeting was over. She walked out of the tower in a daze, stepping into the city's noise and chaos like a woman waking from a dream. She didn't know then what forces had shifted inside that office, or that her life had already changed in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But somewhere deep down she felt it. She wasn't just hired. She was seen. 2 months into the job, Annie had settled into the rhythm of life at Blackwell Enterprises. But nothing about it was ordinary. Every day was a test of endurance, precision, and diplomacy. Damien Blackwell didn't suffer inefficiency or excuses. Yet he never raised his voice. He didn't need to. A single look from him, cool and measured, was enough to send department heads into a tailspin. But with Annie, it was different. He was firm, yes, but never dismissive. She noticed the way he paused sometimes when she spoke, as if giving her words more weight than they deserved. There were moments, fleeting and silent, when she'd glance up from her laptop and catch him looking at her. Not professionally, not analytically, just looking. But she pushed the thought aside. He was her boss, and this job was the lifeline she'd clung to when she was drowning. So when his executive assistant handed her a travel itinerary with her name beside Damien's, she blinked in confusion. "You're flying to Milan with him," the assistant said, barely looking up from her screen. "Week-long trip. You'll be coordinating his meetings with the Italian investors." Annie stared at the packet. "I wasn't aware I was going." "He requested you specifically," the assistant added with a small, knowing smirk. The private jet left JFK under silver clouds. Inside, the silence was plush and comfortable. Damien sat opposite her, reading from a leather-bound notebook. Annie stole glances, just small ones. There was something about him mid-flight, with the city below and clouds outside, that made him seem almost untouchable, as if he belonged somewhere above the world. They didn't speak much until the 3rd day of the trip. After back-to-back meetings with stiff-suited investors and a product launch event that dragged into the evening, Damien leaned against the elevator wall in the hotel lobby and exhaled deeply. "You deserve a real dinner," he said suddenly. Annie blinked. "Sorry, you've been working harder than anyone here, and I've yet to thank you for it. Join me tonight." Her stomach twisted. "Sir, Not as a boss," he interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. "Just, Damien, just dinner." She nodded before she could overthink it. The restaurant was hidden in a quiet alley, bathed in candlelight and soft piano. They sat across from each other at a corner table, the atmosphere cocooned in low conversation and clinking glasses. Damien ordered in fluent Italian. Annie tried to hide her smile when he offered her wine. "This place," he said after a few sips, "was where I signed my first international deal." "You always knew you'd be this successful?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "I knew I had to be." There it was again, the edge in his voice. Something old and wounded, just under the surface. She leaned forward, curiosity nudging her past her usual caution. "What did you give up to get here?" His eyes met hers. In the low light, they were darker, softer. "Everything that didn't fit inside this suit," he said. The words hung between them like an invitation. But neither moved yet. Back at the hotel, Annie carried Damien's tablet to his suite. She hesitated before knocking, but duty won. He opened the door. Shirtless, a white towel wrapped low around his waist, water glistening on his chest from the shower. He froze. She did too. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. She held out the tablet with trembling fingers, but it slipped, clattering to the floor between them. They both bent to retrieve it, hands brushing. And then there was no space between them. The kiss came fast, desperate, unplanned. Her back hit the door as he pulled her into the suite. Words dissolved into touch. She wasn't thinking anymore, and neither was he. Logic was no match for the storm between them. Clothes fell. Time stopped. That night, there was no CEO and assistant. No rules. Just 2 lonely souls who let the walls drop for a few stolen hours. In the morning, reality returned like cold air. Annie wrapped the hotel robe around her and stood by the window. Damien poured coffee in silence, his expression unreadable. We should forget this, he said finally, voice low. It was a moment. That's all. She nodded, heart crumbling quietly inside her chest. Yes, she whispered. A moment. They never spoke of it again. But the moment refused to forget them. The days that followed Milan blurred together. Back at Blackwell Tower, Annie resumed her duties like nothing had happened. She arrived on time, dressed sharply, answered calls, and responded to emails with her usual efficiency. If anyone noticed the way her eyes lingered on Damien's door a second too long, they didn't comment. Damien, for his part, was colder. Not cruel, but distant. He didn't avoid her, but the air between them had changed. Every interaction was measured, stripped of softness. Their accidental eye contact now came with a weight, like gravity had thickened between them. They were both pretending. Pretending they hadn't crossed a line. Pretending they hadn't felt what they felt. But Annie had something she couldn't pretend away. She first suspected it when her morning coffee made her nauseous. Then again, a week later, when she couldn't stomach her favorite bagel. At first, she blamed stress. Jet lag. The weather. But her body knew before her mind would accept it. The test was an afterthought, one of those just to rule it out things. She bought it half-heartedly, left it in her bathroom for 2 days, and finally took it one bleary-eyed morning. 2 lines. Bold. Unmistakable. She stared at the stick until her knees gave out, and she sank to the tiled floor in stunned silence. This wasn't possible. He was infertile. He said so. She hadn't been with anyone else. Her heart raced. Her hands trembled. She wasn't prepared for this. She hadn't imagined herself as a mother, not now, not like this. And yet, beneath the panic, a strange warmth bloomed. A flicker of awe. A life was growing inside her. She sat on the floor and whispered the truth aloud like a secret. I'm pregnant, she told him 2 days later. It was after hours. The office was quiet, the cleaning crew humming in the background. Damien was still in his suit, his tie loosened but not removed. She stepped into his office and closed the door behind her. He looked up, immediately sensing something was wrong. Annie, she took a breath. I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything. He stood slowly, his brow furrowed. Okay. I'm pregnant, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. His face went still. Not pale, not angry, just still like every cell in his body had frozen. He sat down hard in his chair. He shook his head. That can't be. I know, she said gently. You told me. You said you were infertile. But I haven't been with anyone else, Damien. Ever since that night, it's only been me. His fingers clenched around the edge of the desk. His jaw worked, but no words came. I'm not asking you for anything, she continued. I'm keeping the baby. But I thought you deserved to know. Silence stretched between them. He looked at her with eyes clouded by disbelief, fear, and something she couldn't name. You're sure? He asked finally. She nodded once. He exhaled shakily, dragging a hand through his hair. Then, I believe you. Annie's eyes widened. She hadn't expected that. Not acceptance. Not faith. But how? He asked, almost to himself. I was told. He stopped. Never mind. He stood and walked around the desk, standing just a few feet from her. I'm not going to abandon you, he said. Or the baby. Her voice cracked. Why? Because I care about you more than I should, he said quietly. And because whatever this is, it's mine. I feel that. Annie's eyes filled with tears. And if the baby's truly mine, he said softer now, then everything I thought I knew about my life just changed. From that night on, something shifted between them again. Not back to what it was before Milan, but not quite a relationship either. A fragile in-between, held together by shared uncertainty and an unspoken tenderness. Damien accompanied her to the first doctor's appointment. He sat quietly in the corner, watching the ultrasound monitor as the doctor narrated the flickering black and white images. Then they heard it, the heartbeat. Steady. Fast. Alive. Damien blinked once slowly. Annie watched his hand tremble slightly as he reached up to wipe his face. She pretended not to notice the tears he didn't acknowledge. Outside, as they walked to his car in silence, he paused by the passenger door and turned to her. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. She looked at him, heart aching, uncertain. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more unsure of anything," he said with a half-smile. "But I know this. I'm not letting you go through this without me." Annie nodded, a silent promise forming between them. The baby wasn't just a consequence. It was a beginning. In the weeks that followed the doctor's appointment, something soft and unfamiliar settled between them. Not quite love. Not yet. But something like hope, trying to grow where it had once been denied. Damien became a constant in Annie's world. He began arriving at work earlier, not to review contracts or earnings reports, but to check on how she was feeling. He stocked his office fridge with ginger ale and plain crackers, things she mentioned in passing that helped with the nausea. He arranged for her to take half-days without asking for them. She found prenatal vitamins on her desk one morning in a velvet-lined box, next to a sticky note that simply read, "The best kind." I checked. Annie never said thank you out loud. But she looked at him differently now, like maybe the man behind the tailored suits and steely mask was someone who could hold a heart gently if you let him. But the world didn't slow down just because they did. The media got wind of it. Rumors spread like wildfire. The elusive Damien Blackwell seen at an OB/GYN clinic with his assistant. Headlines ranged from suggestive to cruel. CEO's assistant expecting, inside the billionaire's office romance. And then the questions started. In the lobby. In the elevator. In quiet whispers around the office. Annie was humiliated. She tried to laugh it off at first, but the tension crawled under her skin like thorns. Some colleagues treated her like a scandal, others like a threat. One afternoon, she found her inbox flooded with accidental group emails mocking her. She nearly walked into Damien's office to quit, but he already knew. That evening, without warning, he held a press conference. In front of the cameras, his suit crisp and his expression stone, he addressed the swirling speculation. "I would like to state on record," he said calmly, "that Miss Wade is not simply an employee. She is a woman I care for deeply, and she is carrying my child. I ask that our privacy be respected. Any attempts to tarnish her reputation will be met with legal response from my office." The statement was broadcast that night. By morning, the mood in the office had changed. But the damage had already touched Annie. That evening, in his car, she sat in silence. Then, softly, she said, "You didn't have to do that." He glanced at her. "Yes, I did. You've never claimed anyone publicly. You've never given me a reason to." She turned to look at him. "Why are you doing all this?" He pulled the car over on the quiet, empty road. Streetlights glowed like distant stars above them. Then he faced her fully. "Because I don't want you to run from me," he said. "Because I don't want to wake up one day and find out I let the best thing in my life walk out the door." Annie's breath caught. Damien reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to her without a word. Inside was a printed lab requisition. A DNA test. "I trust you," he said. "But I don't trust what I've been told about myself. I need to know, not for me, but for him. For our son." She nodded, quietly touched by the way he said our. The test was done within days. It was discreet, private, administered by a private physician at Damien's estate. Annie tried not to obsess about it, but she could feel the tension in Damien, even when he didn't speak of it. Then the results arrived. He didn't call her. He came to her apartment, knocked on her door like a man holding the edge of the world in his hands. She opened it and saw the envelope in his hand. He didn't speak. He just stepped inside, pulled her close, and placed the paper in her hand. She opened it. Paternal probability, 99.9%. Annie stared at it, then looked up. Damien was already crying, just one slow, silent tear. "I'm going to be a father," he whispered. "You already are," she said softly. And then, for the first time, Damien Blackwell, billionaire, strategist, control freak, sank to his knees before her, laid his head gently against her belly, and whispered words no one else would ever hear. "I don't know how this happened, but thank you." The days that followed were quieter. Not because the world stopped whispering, but because Annie and Damien stopped listening. With the DNA test confirming what their hearts already knew, Damien seemed to breathe differently. Less like a man managing a crisis, and more like a man embracing a miracle. He began joining Annie at her prenatal classes, sitting awkwardly in a sea of expectant mothers and nervous husbands. He took notes, asked questions, even practiced breathing techniques, though he did so with a visible scowl that made Annie laugh every time. One evening, after a class, he turned to her in the car. "I've built my life around logic and control," he said. "But nothing about you or this child fits inside that. And I've never been more grateful to be proven wrong." Annie looked at him, heart thudding. She didn't speak, but her hand found his and held it tightly. It was late autumn when he brought her to the countryside. He didn't tell her why. "Just a weekend away," he said simply. "You've been working too hard. You need rest." The estate was a quiet, elegant retreat, miles of land wrapped in trees turning gold and red. The air smelled of pine, and the house, an old manor he'd quietly bought years ago, was silent except for the crackle of the fireplace and the slow hum of classical music playing in the background. That night, they dined under a canopy of fairy lights in the glass conservatory. The staff had disappeared discreetly after serving, and a private string quartet played soft melodies in the distance. Damien wore no tie that evening. His shirt was open at the collar, and his sleeves were rolled to his elbows. He looked softer somehow. Human. Still powerful, still composed, but vulnerable in a way Annie had never quite seen before. When dessert came, she expected something elaborate. Instead, the plate was simple, crème brûlée, her favorite. Except at the center of the sugar crust was a small, black velvet box. Her breath caught. Damien stood slowly, walked around the table, and knelt before her, not just on one knee, but both. He looked up at her with eyes full of something he'd once sworn off forever: surrender. "I never planned for this," he said, voice low. "I never planned for you. I didn't think I deserved it. But somehow you walked into my life and made it feel like home." He opened the box. Inside was a delicate platinum ring, nestled with a single flawless emerald-cut diamond flanked by two smaller stones. One for him, one for her, and one for the boy they hadn't yet met. "I don't want to love you in silence anymore," he said. "Marry me, Annie. Let's raise our son together. Let's give him the life neither of us had." Tears spilled down her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. She tried to speak, but her throat closed with emotion. So she nodded, fast, desperate, joyful. "Yes," she whispered finally. "Yes. 100 times yes." He stood and kissed her, not urgently, not hungrily, but gently, like a promise. That night, curled in his arms beneath a mountain of warm blankets, Annie whispered, "Did you know the ring would fit?" He smiled against her hair. "Of course. I measured your finger while you were asleep. I don't do guesses, Annie. I do certainty." She laughed. "So what are you now? A father, a husband, a romantic?" He kissed her forehead and said simply, "Yours." The wedding was nothing like the headlines expected. No paparazzi, no sprawling guest list, no designer spectacle. Instead, it was held in the garden of the countryside estate where Damien had proposed. Just close friends, trusted family, and the quiet rustle of autumn leaves falling like blessings. Annie wore a soft ivory gown that shimmered in the golden light. Damien stood at the altar in a charcoal suit, a quiet confidence in his eyes and a visible softness around his mouth that no one had seen before her. Lucas, barely 3 months old, slept in the arms of Damien's mentor, an old friend and retired judge, who would later hand him to his father after the vows were spoken. Annie's mother cried openly. Margaret, Damien's former assistant, flew back from Europe just to attend. She hugged Annie afterward and whispered in her ear, "He was always waiting for something to anchor him. Turns out it was you." The first year of marriage wasn't perfect. There were late-night feedings, exhausted mornings, meetings Damien missed because he was learning to swaddle. Annie struggled with self-doubt, questioning if she was good enough to raise a child in a world so different from the one she'd known. But they talked through it all. Damien, who once buried emotion under work, now listened more than he spoke. And Annie, who once held everything in to survive, now shared without fear. Blackwell Enterprises continued to thrive under his leadership, but Damien worked from home more. He made a nursery beside his home office and insisted no meetings be scheduled after 6 p.m. Lucas gets priority, he said more than once, to stun board members who eventually stopped questioning him. Annie started writing during Lucas's nap times. What began as journaling became essays. What became essays turned into chapters. Then a book, Against All Odds, was published a year later, chronicling her journey from career loss to motherhood, from despair to resilience. It was raw, honest, and deeply personal. It hit bestseller lists within weeks. Not because she was the wife of a billionaire, but because people saw themselves in her. At the book launch, Damien stood at the back of the room, Lucas in his arms, pride written all over his usually stoic face. When asked to speak, he only said this: "She gave me a life I never believed I deserved. She gave me my son, my heart, and a future. The only thing I gave her was a chance. I hope the rest of the world listens when she says they deserve one too." Years later, when Lucas would ask how his parents met, Annie would smile, Damien would sigh dramatically, and they'd both say, "It started with a job, and ended with a family." Then Damien would add with a smirk, "Your mother seduced me on a business trip." Annie would roll her eyes. But their son, like the love that created him, would grow up knowing this truth. Sometimes life writes its own story, and when you least expect it, it rewrites the ending. The house was quiet now, not because it was empty, but because peace had replaced chaos. Annie stood on the back veranda, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of chamomile tea. The late spring breeze carried the scent of fresh earth and the distant laughter of children from the meadow beyond. Lucas, now 5, ran through the tall grass with their golden retriever bounding behind him. His dark curls bounced with every step, and his laughter, his father's laugh, carried far across the hill. Damien watched from the garden bench, flipping through the pages of the newspaper, one eye always on his son. He wasn't the man the world still thought he was. Yes, he still led Blackwell Enterprises, but now as chairman, not CEO. He had passed the operational reins to someone younger and more eager to burn the midnight oil. He no longer needed the distraction. He had everything he'd once tried to earn through power: love, legacy, and belonging. Inside, Annie's second book sat on her writing desk, halfway through edits. Her first had sold in multiple languages. She now spoke at conferences, led workshops for women navigating motherhood and ambition, and quietly funded scholarships through a foundation she and Damien co-founded. They named it the Wade Blackwell Trust. One night, over wine and soft jazz, Damien had told her, "You gave our name something more than wealth. You gave it meaning." That evening, as the sun dipped low over the trees, Lucas rushed to them breathless, cheeks flushed. "Mama," he panted, "Daddy said we can plant my tree today." Annie smiled. "Your tree?" He nodded seriously. "You said every boy should plant a tree to grow with him." Damien ruffled his son's hair. A tree, a story, and a name worth carrying. They planted the sapling at the edge of the garden. One small maple tree, its roots tender, its future tall. As Damien's hands pressed soil around it, he looked up at Annie. She was watching him, eyes glowing in the golden light. "This," he said softly, "was the future I didn't even know I wanted." She knelt beside him, took his hand, and whispered, "This was the story we rewrote." And together, with their son between them and a tree beneath their hands, they sealed it, not with vows or wealth, but with quiet devotion and love that had endured all odds.